Chris and Jack Rosenthal woke up in their room full of anticipation for their upcoming trip. It was only 6:30 in the morning. If it had been a normal school day, they wouldn't even wanted to get up at 7. But they were both looking forward to going to see Uncle Philip and meeting Johnny and Jessie. The summer sun illuminated their room with a bright yellow colour. In the corner of the room, next to the cage with Freddie the hamster, were 2 travel bags. Jack climbed out of bed, wanting to pick out a book to read before they left after breakfast. "You can't be serious. Believe me, you won't have time to read at our uncle's house," the 15-year-old Chris snapped at his brother, who was a year younger. Then he sat up in bed and rubbed his eyes. At first glance, his short haircut made him look like his brother. In reality, however, he was completely different and taller than Jack. Jack quickly tucked the book back into the bookcase. He liked to read every spare moment he had, and Chris always picked up on it, since he only read on his own out of compulsion. "Mum and Dad are up too. I heard them downstairs in the kitchen." He tried to change the subject. When Chris heard his parents were in the kitchen, he jumped out of bed and was about to follow them downstairs. Jack followed him, trying to mimic the gait of his older brother, whom he adored for his physical strength and confidence. Chris excelled in many sports. Everyone at school knew he was good at karate and was a fine runner. Running helped him a lot in football, in which he was above average. Jack longed to play football as well, but what came naturally and effortlessly to his brother, he had to earn through hard training. Parents Tom and Evelyn were preparing breakfast and some sandwiches in case the boys got hungry on the journey. They were both lost in their own thoughts, and the silence was only broken by the sizzling of bacon on the stove. Tom was a very good cook and liked to make fried eggs for the whole family in the morning. Evelyn appreciated his help. She knew how to cook, but found it an annoying necessity. During their years together, she learned to leave the cooking to her husband. She never interfered with his work, only helped him. "Do you still think it's a good idea to go see your Uncle Philip?" Tom asked, confidently flipping the bacon in one pan and then removing the finished egg from the other. Evelyn stopped filling the sandwiches with cheese and ham and replied thoughtfully, "I don't know. I don't feel very good about it. I remember my father despising Philip and not talking about him at all. What I tell you now, I've never told anyone. It was after our mother died when we moved to London. I woke up one night because I was thirsty. I went into the kitchen to get a drink and found a half-torn photograph by the bin. There was Uncle Philip and our mother. I noticed that there were a few other torn photos in the bin. My father never knew what I had witnessed, or that I had saved that one photo as a memento. I wanted to take more pictures out of the bin in the morning, but they weren't there. I realize now that this is the only photo of Philip. I secretly glued it together at the time. It was tucked away in an album for years." "Don't tell me you still have that picture." "Yes, I have it. I started looking for it as soon as Patrick called and told me about the letter from Philip. I only discovered it yesterday. It was so well hidden that I couldn't find it myself. I put it under a childhood photo." Evelyn stopped in mid-sentence and walked out of the kitchen, where she caught Chris and Jack listening outside the door. "How long have you 2 rascals been listening?" she said in a stern voice, but she wasn't really angry. "Just a little while. We both just woke up. So you have a picture of Uncle Philip? And will you show us what he looks like?" Jack pleaded. "Sure, it's in my handbag. I'll show it to you after breakfast," Evelyn promised, and went back to making sandwiches. Meanwhile, Tom served everything on the table. The boys began to salivate when they saw their favourite breakfast. "Mum, aren't you hungry?" Jack asked, quickly popping a big mouthful of eggs into his mouth. "I'm coming, it's ready." Evelyn bagged the sandwiches and joined the others. Everyone concentrated on their food, and breakfast was eaten without further discussion. Chris and Jack were all impatient with the impending departure. After breakfast, they quickly got ready and eagerly stomped around the front door. The last of the luggage and Freddie's cage were packed into the car, and the Rosenthal family excitedly set off down the road. Evelyn pulled a black and white photo from her purse, taped all over with yellowed sellotape. Fortunately, the picture was not ruined at the level where the figures' faces were. Evelyn held it in front of her eyes for a moment so she could take another quick look. There stood a middle-aged man, tall and slender. His short black hair peeked out from under his hat, and his fringe fell into his dark, piercing eyes. Philip's prominent feature was his large nose. He looked like a leader type and gave a confident impression in his suit and leather boots. Besides him stood his younger sister, Evelyn's late mother, Mary, tall and slender like him. Otherwise, she resembled her brother, only in her expressive eyes. Unlike him, she had fair hair and a small mouth and nose. She wore a beautiful flowered dress and bright-heeled shoes. A feeling of warm love washed over Evelyn at the sight of her mother of about 20 years. She realized that she didn't look much like her. Upon closer examination of Philip, Evelyn realized that she and Patrick were more like him. They both had the same black hair and distinctive nose, though a little more subtle than their uncle. Patrick looked a younger and slightly more handsome version of his uncle. She was a little disconcerted by this discovery, as she only noticed it now. "Here's the picture you wanted," Evelyn addressed her son. "They both look very elegant," Jack remarked, handing the photo to Chris. "I think it's a picture from my mother's dancing lessons," Evelyn said. Chris really liked Philip. His tall stature and intellectual facial expression gave the impression of an influential and powerful aristocrat. It also didn't escape his notice that he had a ring on his little finger, adorned with a dark stone and a pipe half hidden in his jacket pocket. Chris recognized his grandmother immediately from other photos that they had at home. In this photo, she looked very young and carefree. "And how was your uncle?" Jack wondered. "My mother used to tease him for always making things up and inventing things. He liked to work on puzzles and mechanisms. He kept locking himself in the workshop making things. He was probably very clever," Evelyn mused. "I wonder how Uncle Philip has changed over the years," Chris said, handing the picture back to his mother. Evelyn looked again at the youthful face, and a wave of long-forgotten sadness over the loss of her mother washed over her. Tears welled up in her eyes as she fought back with all her might. Just as she had learned to do so many years ago, she turned her head to the window and began to watch the passing landscape. She saw everything in a blur. Instead, a little girl sitting on a beautiful patterned rug appeared before her inner vision. The little girl picked up a doll, so small to fit in her hand. She kissed it on the cheek, placed it in its equally small cradle, and gently covered it with a cloth instead of a blanket. "Sleep, my baby. I'll sing you another lullaby for good night," said the little girl to the doll. But the sweet singing was interrupted by the arrival of her father, with tears streaming down his cheeks. That was the moment when the then 6-year-old Evelyn and her 3-year older brother Patrick learned that their mother had died in a car accident. Since then, Evelyn has never seen her father cry. The image of that shattering day vanished, and instead a hilly landscape appeared before her eyes. Countless sheep grazed in the surrounding hills, their white bodies covering the landscape as far as the eye could see. She didn't even notice when the fields and meadows turned into hilly pastures. She must have been asleep for longer than she thought. There was a grave silence in the car as the boys fell asleep during the journey while Tom concentrated on driving. The quiet sound of the engine and the warm sunshine slowly began to lull Evelyn to sleep.